2007 was a year. The iPhone was released, Google bought YouTube, the final Harry Potter book would drop, social media was growing like never before, and The Big Bang Theory premiered and would scar nerds with an even worse image than they already had, making them the butt of the joke for white moms everywhere. To me, 2007 didn't just mark a new age, it put the early 2000s in the retirement home, and laid the blueprint for a more sanitized, franchise-focused culture we still live in today. The early 2000s were marked by clunky optimism. Tech was exciting but goofy, movies were colorful, campy, and still riding that 90s wave. The internet was messy but full of personality. It was the last time things felt earnest, cringe even, but honest. Cringe in a good way, by the way. When 2007 came around, in real time, culture was changing and the age of technological optimism was coming to an end. The version we remember fondly from the early 2000s anyway, as we see the technology we only dreamt of in reality very soon, for the most part. Nerd culture was on the rise due to the amount of money to be made from children and man-children that wouldn't let go of the 80s. Everything got sleeker, darker, grittier, and more commercialized. It wasn't just the death of camp. It was the beginning of a more algorithmic time. And at the head of all this, two blockbuster films that embody this cultural shift in the media world better than just about anything else to me. A movie about a spider guy and a movie about a normal guy that rides inside a robot guy. See, media and culture had been somewhat building to the moment that 2007 was bringing to the world. MySpace had everyone glued to her early social media presence, putting music on their pages, taking aesthetic pictures, blinging out their webpage. I don't know, I was too young to have a MySpace truthfully. Harry Potter was becoming a huge phenomenon, taking over the movie and book world. Hey, speaking of that, remember when it became common practice to spoil those films and books with the whole Snape kills Dumbledore thing?
Snape dies on page 658. Fred Weasley dies on page 637.
As with Harry Potter, this moment was the age of looking for fictional media to adapt to the big screen. Thus, we would see the rise of comic book films, with the world chasing after the success that 2002's Spider-Man and 2000's X-Men released to. The early seeds were being planted for the, hey guys, you were bullied and made fun of for no reason cause we all like comics and anime now, period. Yeah, despite explosive entries to the comic book movie genre, the culture was still largely anti-nerd in the 2000s and would continue to be so in the 2010s for a good bit. One thing that may have kept these films in the for nerds limelight is despite looking to translate themselves to realism and gritty visuals, comic book cinema still lended itself to a more optimistic, campier, and less dark aesthetic, even when they were literally dark. We had Spider-Man 1 and 2, X-Men 1, 2, and 3, Batman Begins, the original Hulk, Fantastic Four, Superman Returns, Daredevil, and Catwoman for some reason. All of these movies tried to ground the comic book world into a more realistic reality, but none of them were truly able to escape that camp feeling that we saw in the 90s Batman films like Batman Returns and Batman Forever. This isn't a bad thing, but to the average moviegoer, it's a feeling that can't be shaken and wouldn't be until later in 2007 when a film would release that would set the scene for the biggest game changers in the world of comic book cinema, 2008's Iron Man and Batman The Dark Knight. But before those two films, there was Michael Bay's 2007 blockbuster Transformers and Sony's flop or revisionist classic, depending on the camp that you're in, Spider-Man 3.
Spider-Man! What's cracking, baby?
Which one set the groundwork for 2008? Well, technically both, but Transformers. It was Transformers.
Welcome to Burger King. Can I take your...
A Whopper. No cheese, no onions. Extra pickles
Sir,
on the
this is
side
a
of it.
drive-thru. You need a vehicle?
Fine.
You need a driver, too.
Oh, come on.
While both of these films have their share of differences, one similarity that they have is the immense amount of hype that they had on their way to theaters. If you were around during that time, you'll know that movie hype was built different back then.
Well, Toonami's hooking you up VIP style.
That's a good thing, right?
This Saturday night, we're showing you a bright and shiny sneak peek of the new Transformers movie after the Transformers Cybertron Marathon.
Movies and entertainment in general nowadays just feel like a given due to streaming and the pull that franchises like the MCU once had. They feel like they just happen and the build-up isn't there unless you're talking about something like Infinity War or Endgame. But back then, you were not getting away from the hype cycle. Transformers and Spider-Man 3 were huge landmarks for the movie world. The films, being for audiences of all ages, were literally inescapable. Spider-Man had iDog variants, Slurpee cups, a freaking bug habitat, those big head Burger King toys that we all wanted so bad as kids, and who can forget the Itsy Bitsy Spider-Man and Superhero Squad line.
The itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out.
Transformers was no different, with Verizon ads, Mountain Dew crossovers, Lunchables promos, Burger King toys, the legendary Optimus Prime voice-changing helmet,
I am Optimus Prime.
and of course a Maxim contest cause the film featured Megan Fox in, kids movie. How many of you had your coming of age moments with that first scene with her checking out that car? And be for real. But regardless of all this exposure, as a kid of the era, I was in heaven. I already had my fair share of Spider-Man and Transformers toys, sure, but I had to get my favorite characters for their big screen debut, Venom and Starscream, aka two of the biggest letdowns of my life.
You fail me yet again, Starscream.
Despite the disappointment ahead, this was a huge moment for the world of blockbusters, and for the time, it felt like there was no beating this combo of releases. Upon reveal and eventual release, the mission for both films was clear. Spider-Man 3 was the end of an era, and potentially the start of Spider-Man's future, wrapping up the Uncle Ben, Goblin, and Peter's growth and relationship arc by bringing in one of his most iconic enemies, Venom. Meanwhile, Transformers was attempting to adapt a new nerd franchise for audiences and make it hip enough to pull it out of the geekdom and start a new cinematic universe by making it cool to mainstream audiences, beginning a new era of blockbusters. Both of these films represent the end and change of a stage so well in these missions and their presentation. Let me explain, because it kind of sounds like I'm waffling a bit, right? Spider-Man 3 basically closed the door. It was the last superhero film that really felt like a product of that old 2000s era. While not completely successful in its goals, it was a film full of heart, whereas a lot of comic book films now and after this felt like products before movies. Spider-Man 3 was a classic Raimi campfest. One of those movies that gets better with age, which sets it apart from the new comic book movies that flop and end up being unwatchable garbage that you can tell was just made to set up something and make money. While Spidey 3 fell into that trap due to studio interference, you can still really feel Raimi's, the writers, and the cast's hearts throughout the runtime. It's actually somewhat enjoyable, but its overall failure would see this purposefully campy tone done away with for good, as seen in movies like Iron Man and The Dark Knight, which were made to avoid any goofiness that their forefather comic book flicks reflected. Spider-Man 3 felt like a last gasp of sincerity in the mainstream summer superhero blockbuster, which is ironic because of what ruined it. It's a messy story but human and full of feeling, cringe, and passion. Once again, good cringe. Not saying new blockbusters always avoid this, but we were entering an epoch where that wasn't the case. Why do you think Barbie, Oppenheimer, Parasite, and Godzilla -1 were celebrated so much recently? On the other hand, we had Transformers. Before I start, yeah, I like this entry, but this was definitely the beginning of the IP spectacle film that franchises like the MCU, DCU, Hollywood monsters, and other future films would follow behind. This was the quintessential prototype for modern Hollywood blockbusters, full of CG, product placement, marketability, and lots of military-esque vibes. Oh, and don't forget the modern hip humor.
Idaho plate.
This was where the world discovered what made the nerd IP quote-unquote cool. Many tropes you see way down the MCU can be traced back here somewhat. And what's funny is that the MCU fans were cracking jokes on Michael Bay adaptations back in the day too. The cinematic universe was coming to fruition, and the writers already had plans which would take form as various sequels, prequels, and spin-offs that would expand the Transformers movie world which includes a Bumblebee movie, Operation Skyfire, which was a film set during World War II, Knights, a film that would team Transformers with King Arthur and the Knights of the Round, a Beast Wars spinoff, and a G.I. Joe crossover. So yeah, Transformers laid out the algorithmic blueprint, and every major franchise would follow. Both of these films were very similar, but they rode nostalgia and their nerd roots in different ways, and they both showcased the change of the landscape from a director-driven one to a brand-driven one that we have now. Transformers didn't just make giant robots cool to mainstream audiences, but redefined what a blockbuster looked like. It wasn't just telling a story anymore, but building a franchise until that franchise finally fails. Studios saw that money and ran with it, paving the way for cinematic universes and algorithmic storytelling. Within a year, Iron Man would hit theaters and successfully jumpstart the MCU. The Dark Knight would also release and dominate the theaters. Superheroes, for a time, wouldn't be colorful or cringy. They'd become more military-esque and mainstream cool. Nerd culture would start to become more marketed than ever, sanitized and ready for wider audiences, kinda like Funko Pops. 2007 marked a shift. Spider-Man 3 felt like the end of a personal, slightly messy but heartfelt era of early 2000s media, while Transformers ushered in the polished, franchise-driven future that would define the 2010s. These movies didn't just reflect the changing film industry, they signaled the end of the early 2000s as we knew it. So yeah, a spider guy and a guy riding in a robot guy didn't just take over theaters in 2007. They marked the moment that everything changed and the end of soulful cringe. Well, almost. We still have some soulful cringe out there. But what do you think? Am I spitting or just waffling? I truly feel that 2000 through 2006 was the true era that people are talking about when speaking on 2000s nostalgia. While 2007 would bring in so much that we all dislike about the 2010s and even now, and the beginning of that all was the release of so much media in 2007. Regardless of your thoughts, please like and subscribe if you enjoy and leave a comment on your stance and memories with 2007's media and culture. I would love to read it all, and trust I do read all these comments. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I see you next time.